The first thing Eleanor noticed was the smoke. Not the acrid, choking smoke of burning timber she knew from the fireplaces back in Tucson, but something earthier, mixed with sage and pine. It curled through her nostrils, pulling her from the depths of unconsciousness like a rope hauling her up from a well. Her eyes fluttered open to darkness, punctuated by orange firelight dancing on hide walls. Buffalo hide, she realized with a start, stretched taut over wooden poles. The ground beneath her wasn't the feather mattress she'd known all her 23 years, but layers of soft furs that smelled of animals and weather and something indefinably wild. Memory crashed over her like a flash flood in an arroyo. The raid. Screaming horses. Her father's men scattered like quail before the Apache warriors who'd descended on their wagon train. She'd been thrown from the wagon, her head striking something hard. And then, nothing. Eleanor tried to sit up, but her body protested with a symphony of aches. Her hand flew to her head, finding a tender spot wrapped in some kind of poultice that smelled of herbs. As her fingers explored further, she discovered her hair, once pinned in proper Victorian fashion, now hung loose and tangled around her shoulders. "Do not move too quick." The voice came from the shadows beyond the fire circle, deep, measured, each word carefully placed like stones across a creek. Eleanor's heart hammered as a figure shifted in the darkness. A man emerged into the firelight, and her breath caught. He was younger than she'd expected, perhaps 30 winters, with sharp cheekbones that caught the shadows and eyes dark as obsidian. His hair fell past his shoulders, held back by a leather band decorated with silver conchos. He wore buckskin leggings and a simple cotton shirt, a strange mix of Apache and Anglo clothing that made him difficult to place. "Water," he said, holding out a gourd. When she didn't move, he set it within her reach and stepped back, settling cross-legged by the fire with the patient stillness of a man who'd learned to wait. Eleanor's throat burned with thirst, but fear kept her frozen. This was an Apache lodge. She was alone with an Apache warrior. Everything she'd been taught, every lurid newspaper account and whispered horror story from the ladies' sewing circle, screamed danger. Yet he hadn't touched her, hadn't even come close enough to touch her. Thirst won. She reached for the gourd with trembling fingers and drank deeply. The water was cool and sweet, flavored faintly with something she couldn't identify. As she drank, she studied him over the rim. "Where?" Her voice came out as a croak. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Where am I?" "Safe," he said simply. "In the Dragoon Mountains. 3 days' ride from where we found you." Found, not captured. The word choice wasn't lost on her. "The others, my father's men." His expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. "Some lived, rode back to Tucson. And my father." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the pop of juniper in the fire. That was answer enough. Eleanor closed her eyes against the wave of grief, but tears leaked through anyway. James Morrison had been a hard man, more interested in his silver mining ventures than his motherless daughter. But he'd been the only family she had left. "He fought," the man said quietly. "Died standing." It was meant as comfort, she supposed. In their world, the Apache world, it was an honor. She wanted to rage at him, to scream that her father should be alive and counting his profits, not dead and honored. But what was the point? The dead were dead, whether they died standing or running. "Why am I here?" she asked instead, pulling the fur blanket higher around her shoulders. Only then did she realize her dress was gone, replaced by a soft doe-skin shift that left her arms bare. Panic flared anew. "What have you—" "Your dress was torn, bloodied." He gestured to a corner where she could see the remains of her blue traveling dress, indeed torn and stained dark. "My sister dressed you, tended your wounds." Sister, so there were others, but where were they now? As if reading her thoughts, he said, "They will return with sunrise. I stay to watch." To watch, to guard. To ensure she didn't escape, Eleanor studied the lodge. noting the entrance flap tied shut, the way his body positioned between her and the only exit. Yet his weapons, a rifle and a knife she could see, lay beside him, not in his hands. "What's your name?" The question surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. He considered for a long moment. "I have been called many names. The one your people gave me at the white man's school was Samuel Crowfeather." The white man's school. She'd heard of such places, where Apache children were taken to be civilized. It explained his careful English, the cotton shirt, the sadness that seemed to live behind his eyes like an old acquaintance. "I'm Eleanor Morrison," she said, though he probably already knew. "I know." He fed another piece of wood to the fire. "Your father spoke of you before he died." The unspoken words hung between them like smoke. "Am I a prisoner?" Samuel studied her with those dark eyes that seemed to see too much. "Can a bird in a storm be prisoner to the tree that shelters it?" It wasn't an answer, or perhaps it was too much of one. Eleanor drew her knees to her chest, trying to process everything. 3 days unconscious. 3 days of being tended by Apache women while this man, Samuel, kept watch. 3 days during which they could have done anything to her. Yet here she sat, unharmed save for the wound she'd taken in the raid. "I don't understand," she admitted. "Everything I've been told. Apache don't take prisoners. Not women, not without." "Without what?" His voice carried an edge now. "Without doing what your newspapers say, what your soldiers tell in their cups." He shook his head. "We are not the monsters in your stories. Eleanor Morrison." The sound of her name in his careful English sent an unexpected shiver through her. Not fear, something else entirely. "Then what am I?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his words were soft as moth wings. "You are hurt, alone. Your people left you for dead." He met her eyes across the fire. "Among my people, to save a life is to take responsibility for it. You are under my protection until you choose not to be." Choose, as if she had choices. As if a white woman could simply walk out of an Apache camp and stroll back to Tucson through 3 days of hostile desert. "And if I choose to leave, then I will take you to the edge of your world and watch you go." She searched his face for deception, for the savage her world had taught her to see. Instead, she found only steady calm and something that might have been sorrow. "Why?" she whispered. "Why save me at all?" Samuel fed the fire again, taking his time with the simple task. When he looked up, the flames danced in his eyes like ancient spirits. "Because I have walked between worlds too long to let another soul fall between them," he said. "Because your father died bravely, and it would dishonor him to let his daughter perish in the dust. Because..." He paused, seeming to weigh words like gold nuggets. "Because you called out in your fever dreams. Not for God, not for rescue. You called for your mother. In that, Apache and Anglo are the same." Eleanor felt tears threaten again. She'd dreamed of her mother these 3 days, called for a woman 10 years in the ground. "Rest now," Samuel said, rising with the fluid grace of a man raised to move silently. "Dawn comes soon. You will need strength for what follows." "What follows?" "Choosing," he said simply, then moved to the far side of the lodge, settling into the shadows like he belonged to them. Eleanor lay back on the furs, her mind churning like a dust devil. Everything she'd known, everything she'd been, lay 3 days and a lifetime away in Tucson. Here in this strange space between worlds, tended by people she'd been taught to fear, protected by a man who spoke of choices as if she had any real ones to make. The fire crackled lower, and exhaustion pulled at her like an undertow. As she drifted toward sleep, she thought she heard him humming something low and melodious. Not quite Apache, not quite anything she recognized. It followed her down into dreams where her mother's voice mixed with smoke and sage, where choosing meant more than living or dying, where a man with careful English and ancient eyes waited patiently for dawn. Dawn came with the sound of women's voices and children's laughter. Eleanor woke to find the lodge transformed by daylight filtering through the smoke hole above. What had seemed mysterious and foreign by firelight now revealed itself as orderly, even homely. Baskets lined the walls, filled with dried foods and household goods. Cooking implements hung from the lodge poles. A cradle board, empty now, rested near the entrance. The flap lifted, and 2 women entered. The elder, perhaps 40 years, carried herself with the authority of one used to managing a household. The younger, barely past girlhood, peeked at Eleanor with curious eyes before ducking her head. "She wakes," the older woman said in accented English. She set down a bowl of something that steamed and smelled of corn and meat. "I am Maria. This is my daughter, Little Dove." Spanish name in Apache, another puzzle in this place of mixed worlds. "You speak English," Eleanor said, struggling to sit up. "Mission school." Maria replied with a shrug that suggested complicated history. "Long ago, before I chose this." She gestured around the lodge, encompassing a life Eleanor couldn't begin to understand. Samuel entered behind them, and Eleanor noticed how Little Dove's face brightened at his presence. "Sister," he'd said. The family resemblance was there in the shape of their eyes, the way they moved with similar grace. "Eat," Maria commanded, pushing the bowl closer. "Then we talk." The food was unfamiliar but good hominy, mixed with venison and flavored with herbs. Eleanor ate while the others went about morning tasks with the ease of long practice. It was strangely domestic, this scene, if she could forget where she was and why. When she finished, Samuel sat across from her while Maria and Little Dove worked nearby, close enough to hear, but granting the illusion of privacy. "You asked why you are here," he began without preamble. "The answer is not simple." Eleanor waited, having learned already that he chose words carefully, like a man picking his way across uncertain ground. "My father is Joseph Crow Feather, a chief, you would say, though the word does not fit properly. When I was 12 winters, soldiers came, not to fight, to talk. They spoke of schools for Apache children, of learning the white man's ways to help our people walk in the new world coming." His hands moved as he spoke, unconscious gestures that seemed to shape memories from air. "My father had eyes to see. He knew the old ways were ending like snow in spring. So he sent me, his only son, to Carlisle Industrial School in Pennsylvania." Eleanor had heard of Carlisle, a place where Indian children were transformed into Americans. "Kill the Indian, save the man," its founder had said. 8 years, Samuel continued. 8 years of short hair and stiff clothes, of being beaten for speaking Apache, of learning to read your books, write your words, think your thoughts. They called it education. We called it something else. But you came back. A bitter smile touched his lips. "Where else would I go to Apache for your world? Too changed for mine. I returned to find my mother dead of sickness the white doctor could not cure. My father disappointed in the son who came back neither Apache nor Anglo, but something caught between." Maria made a soft sound of disagreement. Samuel glanced at her with affection. Not all saw it so, he admitted. "Maria welcomed me, helped me remember what Carlisle tried to make me forget. But the damage was done. I walk between worlds now. Eleanor Morrison, neither fully welcome in either." "Why tell me this?" Eleanor asked, though she suspected she knew. "Because you must understand. When we found you, my father was with the war party. Not to raid, to send a message. Your father's company had moved onto sacred land, despite treaties, despite warnings. The raid was meant to drive them back, not to kill, but—" he spread his hands. "Men with guns and fear make poor choices." Eleanor's food sat heavy in her stomach. "So, my father died for silver, for money." "Men die for less. Truth, bitter as alkali water." "My father saw you fall," Samuel continued. Saw you left behind when your people fled. He is traditional. My father, by old law. You should have been left, but I asked for you." The words hung in the air like dust motes in sunlight. Eleanor's heart did something complicated in her chest. "Asked for me? To save you? To take responsibility?" He met her eyes. "I know what it is to be caught between worlds. I would not see another soul lost there." Maria snorted. "Tell her all. Samuel, do not dance around like a boy at his first gathering." He shot his sister-in-law a look that might have been exasperation or gratitude, perhaps both. "By our law," he said slowly, "to save a life is to bind it to yours. You are under my protection, as I said, but protection means different things to different people. Some in the band say you should be adopted, made Apache. Others say you should be ransomed back to your people. Still others say she is yours by right of saving," Maria finished bluntly. "As wife." The word dropped between them like a stone in still water. Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks, though whether from embarrassment or something else, she couldn't say. "I make no such claim," Samuel said quickly. "You are not property to be claimed, but you should know what others think, what they expect." "And your father?" Eleanor managed to ask. "What does he expect?" Samuel's expression darkened. "He tests me, I think, gives me the white woman to see what I will do. Will I take her as Apache custom allows? Will I return her to her people and prove I am more Anglo than Apache? Will I fail at both and prove I am nothing at all?" The pain in his voice was carefully controlled but unmistakable. Eleanor recognized it, the ache of never quite fitting, though her own experience of it was nothing compared to his. "So I'm a test?" "No." The word came sharp and immediate. "You are a person. A woman who lost her father and nearly her life. Whatever others see, I see that first." Little Dove said something in Apache, too fast for Eleanor to catch even the rhythm of it. Samuel replied in the same language, his tone gentle but firm. The girl ducked her head but smiled. "She says you have spirit," Maria translated. "That she saw it when she helped tend you. Fever dreams tell truth. She believes." "What did I say?" Eleanor asked, not sure she wanted to know. "Many things," Maria replied. "About your mother, about a garden you loved, about wanting to see the ocean." She paused. "About being tired of corsets and tea parties and men who speak to your father instead of you." Eleanor's face burned. Had she really revealed so much in her delirium? "Also," Little Dove added in careful English, "you spoke of birds, always birds, wanting to fly." The two Apache women exchanged glances that seemed to carry entire conversations. Samuel studied the fire as if it held answers to unasked questions. "I should go back," Eleanor said into the silence. "To Tucson, to whatever life waits there." "Your father's house stands empty," Samuel said quietly. "His mine claims are already being fought over by others. You have no brothers, no husband. What waits for you is relatives who will take you in from duty and marry you off quickly to avoid the scandal of your time here." Truth again, sharp as agave thorns. Eleanor had cousins in Tucson, proper people who'd always looked at her father with barely concealed disdain for his rough ways. They'd take her in. Yes, cage her in propriety and marry her to the first respectable man who'd overlook her or deal with the Apache. "Then what do you suggest?" She heard the bitterness in her own voice. "Stay," Maria said simply. "Learn, heal. When you are strong, when you know more than what fear teaches, then choose." "Stay here with the Apache." "With people," Samuel corrected gently. "Who happened to be Apache? Who happened to see you as more than a scandal to be managed or a test to be passed?" Eleanor looked around the lodge, at Maria's competent hands working leather, at Little Dove grinding corn in a stone meditate, at Samuel watching her with those dark eyes that had seen too much. The space that had seemed so foreign last night now felt almost protective, like a cave sheltering her from storms she hadn't known were coming. "What would I do here?" "Live," Maria said. "Work, learn, same as anywhere." "But I don't know how to do anything. Not here," Little Dove giggled. "I will teach. How to cook, make clothes, gather food is not so hard. And I will teach you to survive," Samuel added. "To read the land, find water, understand the language, things that matter here." "You'd teach me Apache ways." Eleanor couldn't hide her surprise. "But I'm white Anglo." "Yes, so," Maria's expression challenged, "I was Mexican. Taken in raid as girl, chose to stay as woman. Little Dove's mother was Papago. We are not all born Apache. Some choose it." Choose. That word again, offered like a gift in a world that had never given Eleanor choices before. "Your people think we are simple," Samuel said. "That we live like animals in the wilderness, but we have laws, customs, beauty. We have poetry and songs that go back to when the world was young. We have knowledge your universities do not teach. We have freedom your civilization cannot imagine. And hardship," Maria added honestly, "and hunger sometimes, and war with Mexicans, Americans, other tribes, is not paradise, but is life, real life." Eleanor thought of her life in Tucson, the stifling heat of proper dress, the endless social calls, the conversations that said nothing, her father's house where she'd been more ornament than person, the suitors who'd looked through her to her inheritance, the garden where she'd spent hours watching birds, envying their wings. "If I stay," she said slowly, "what happens with us? I mean, with this binding?" Samuel's face showed nothing, but his hands stilled in their unconscious movement. "Whatever you choose, if you wish only my protection, you have it. If you wish to learn and leave, I will teach and watch you go. If—" He stopped. "If," Eleanor prompted, her heart doing that complicated thing again. "If you choose to stay as more than student, that too is your choice. Not mine, not my father's, not the band's, yours. But you saved me, by your law. By our law, I am responsible for you. How I fulfill that responsibility is between us." He stood, tall and straight despite the low ceiling. "Think on it, rest, heal. Time enough for choosing when you know what choices mean." He left the lodge, and Eleanor felt his absence like a dropped note in a familiar song. Maria and Little Dove continued their work, chatting in a mix of Apache and Spanish, including her without pushing. The sun climbed higher, sending shafts of light through the smoke hole. Outside, she could hear the sounds of camp life, children playing, dogs barking, the rhythm of daily survival. Inside, surrounded by the quiet industry of women who'd chosen their own paths, Eleanor Morrison began to consider that perhaps being caught between worlds wasn't a curse. Perhaps it was just another kind of freedom. The first lesson was breathing. "You cannot work if you cannot breathe," Maria announced, eyeing Eleanor's attempts to help with morning tasks. Even in the loose doe-skin dress, Eleanor found herself short of breath, unconsciously maintaining the rigid posture years of corsets had trained into her bones. "I am breathing," Eleanor protested, then gasped as Maria's hands pressed against her ribs. "No, you breathe here." Maria indicated Eleanor's upper chest. "Like a sparrow. Must breathe here." She moved her hands to Eleanor's belly. "Like the earth breathes." It took 3 days just to remember how to fill her lungs properly. 3 days of Maria's patient correction, of Little Dove giggling when Eleanor forgot and reverted to shallow sips of air. 3 days of feeling like her body was learning to be itself again. The work came harder than the breathing. Her first attempt at grinding corn left her with blistered palms and barely a handful of coarse meal to show for hours of effort. Little Dove, 10 years her junior, could produce fine flour in the time it took Eleanor to crush a few kernels. "Is okay," the girl said kindly, showing Eleanor how to grip the stone mano properly. "When I was small, I cried over the metate. Mama said tears make the corn bitter. Better to sing." So Eleanor learned to sing, Apache work songs that made no sense to her, but seemed to make the grinding easier. Her hands toughened. Her arms grew strong. The rhythm became meditation, crushing yesterday's proper lady along with the corn. Water hauling was worse. The spring lay a quarter-mile from camp, down a rocky path that twisted through juniper and mesquite. Apache women carried water in large pottery jars balanced on their heads, walking with the fluid grace of dancers. Eleanor's first attempt ended with a broken jar and a soaked dress. "You walk like you're afraid of the earth," Samuel observed, having appeared silently as he often did. "Like it might break beneath you." "It might," Eleanor muttered, wringing water from her hem. "Everything else seems to—" He studied her for a moment, then held out his hand. "Come, different lesson today." She followed him away from camp, past the sentries who nodded respectfully to Samuel, past the horse herd where boys practiced riding, to a clearing where the land opened up to sky. "Sit," he said, folding himself to the ground with easy grace. Eleanor attempted to do the same, managing an awkward collapse that made him almost smile. Almost. "What are we doing?" "Learning to be still." "I am still." "Your body is still. Your spirit moves like a dust storm." He closed his eyes. "Listen." Eleanor listened. She heard wind in the junipers, a hawk's cry distant and wild, the buzz of insects in the sage. But beneath that— "What is that sound?" "The earth," Samuel said without opening his eyes. "Breathing." They sat until Eleanor's legs cramped and her back ached. But somewhere in that stillness, she began to understand. The land here wasn't empty or hostile. It was alive, patient, waiting for those who knew how to listen. Days blended into weeks. Eleanor's hands grew calloused but capable. She learned to read the sky for weather, to know which plants could heal and which would harm. She learned that Apache women were neither the drudges nor the savages her world had painted them, but the backbone of their people, healers, craftswomen, keepers of tradition and practical wisdom both. She learned other things too, that Samuel rose before dawn each day to greet the sun with prayers in a language that sounded like water over stone, that he could track a deer across bare rock but sometimes stared at nothing with the lost look of a man between languages. That when he taught her Apache words, his voice gentled like he was handling something precious and breakable. "Sky," he said one evening, pointing up. "Yeah." "Yeah," Eleanor repeated, the word strange on her tongue. "Star, so." "So." They were gathering medicinal plants, a task Samuel had taken over from Maria, who claimed to have better things to do than watch them circle each other like wary dogs. Eleanor suspected matchmaking but couldn't bring herself to mind. "Why do you teach me these things?" she asked, crushing sage between her fingers to release its sharp scent. Samuel considered before answering. His habit she'd come to appreciate. Words have power. To name a thing is to hold part of it. If you know our words, you know part of us. Not the part your newspapers print, the true part. "And if I use this knowledge against you, if I go back and tell the soldiers what I've learned?" He looked at her then. Really looked. And Eleanor felt seen in a way that had nothing to do with her blonde hair or pale skin marking her as different. "Then I will have misjudged you badly." He paused. "But I do not think Eleanor Morrison is a woman who betrays trust, even if she doesn't yet know what trust means here." The next morning brought a test of a different kind. A hunting party returned with disturbing news. Soldiers were camped 2 valleys over, questioning Mexican traders about white captives. The camp erupted in controlled chaos. Some wanted to move immediately. Others argued for sending scouts. A few looked at Eleanor with expressions that made Samuel step closer to her, hand near but not on his knife. Joseph Crow Feather called a council. Eleanor watched from Maria's lodge as the men gathered, Samuel among them, transformed from her gentle teacher to something harder, more dangerous. The argument that followed needed no translation. Gestures toward her made the topic clear enough. "They discuss you," Maria said unnecessarily. "Some say you bring danger. Some say to trade you back before soldiers come. Some say other things." "What does Samuel say?" Maria's expression was unreadable. "He says nothing, waits for his father to speak." When the council ended, Samuel came to the lodge. His face was carved from stone, but Eleanor had learned to read the tension in his shoulders, the careful control in his movements. "You must decide," he said without preamble. "The soldiers look for you. If you wish to go to them, I will take you tonight. If you stay, we must move camp, go deeper into the mountains where they cannot follow." "What do you want me to do?" "What I want does not matter. It matters to me." The words hung between them like a bridge neither quite dared to cross. Samuel turned away, facing the lodge entrance as if answers waited in the gathering dusk. "I want you to choose freely," he said finally. "Not from fear, not from duty, not because you have nowhere else, but because you want the life that waits here." "What life is that?" Eleanor asked, though her heart already knew. "Hard life, uncertain, always moving, always watching for enemies. But also," he turned back to her, "free, no one telling you how to breathe, how to walk, who to be. No cages made of whalebone and expectations." Eleanor thought of the soldiers, of rescue, of returning to Tucson where her cousins would cluck over her like hens, where she'd be wrapped again in propriety and married off to erase the scandal. She thought of tea parties and calling cards and conversations about nothing. Then she looked at her hands, brown from sun, strong from work, felt the easy breath in her lungs, remembered the taste of freedom in spring water and wild honey. "If I stay," she said carefully, "really stay, what am I to you?" Samuel moved closer, close enough that she could smell sage and smoke on his skin. "Whatever you choose to be, student, friend, more, if—" He stopped. If you could see past what divides us to what could unite us." Eleanor's heart hammered like a war drum. "And what is that?" "Two people who don't quite fit anywhere else," he said softly. "Maybe fitting together." Maria chose that moment to enter, took one look at them, and muttered something in Apache that made Samuel step back. "Soldiers or mountains?" she said briskly. "Choose now, pack later." Eleanor looked between them, Maria with her practical strength, Samuel with his careful hope, outside. She could hear the camp preparing for whatever came next. Her old life pulled at her like a tide, but her new one. "Mountains," she said, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "I choose mountains." Samuel's smile was sunrise after a long night. Maria nodded approval and began issuing rapid orders in Apache. The lodge filled with activity as women began packing with the efficiency of long practice. But Eleanor noticed Samuel hadn't moved. He stood watching her with something in his eyes that made her bold. "Thank you," she said, "for giving me the choice." "Thank you," he replied, "for making it." That night, as the band moved like shadows through the canyons, Eleanor walked beside the horse carrying her few possessions. The doe-skin dress that had felt so strange now moved with her body. The moccasins found their way surely over rough ground. When they paused to rest, she drank from a gourd and ate dried meat without thought for china plates or silver forks. Little Dove appeared at her elbow as they prepared to move again. "You walk better now," she observed, "like the earth knows you." "Maybe it's beginning to," Eleanor said, and realized she meant it. The soldiers would not find them in the high places where they were going, and Eleanor Morrison, who'd once watched caged birds and envied their wings, was finally learning what it meant to fly. The high country was a different world. Here, pine replaced juniper, and the air thinned until every breath reminded Eleanor she'd climbed far from the desert floor. The band had made camp in a hidden valley where a spring bubbled cold and clear, where ancient pines stood sentinel against the sky. "Look," Samuel said, pointing to marks on a boulder near the spring. "My grandfather's grandfather carved these. This has been our place for generations." Eleanor traced the weathered spirals with one finger, feeling the weight of time in the stone. Below them, the world spread out like a map, valleys and ridges fading into blue distance. No sign of the civilization she'd left behind. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "Wait until you see the stars tonight," he promised. They'd been in the high camp for a week now, long enough for the rhythms to establish themselves. Eleanor woke each dawn to help Maria and the other women with morning tasks, spent midday learning skills she'd never dreamed of needing, and in the evening, Samuel taught her to see. "You watch, but don't observe," he said that first night, as they sat apart from the others on a ledge overlooking the valley. "What do you see?" "Trees, rocks, sky." "Look again. What moves?" Eleanor focused, letting her eyes soften the way he'd shown her. "There, something in that oak. A squirrel." "Good. What else?" Gradually, the landscape came alive. A hawk circling on thermals, deer picking their way through manzanita, the shift of shadows that meant clouds building over distant peaks. "Your people look at the land and see resources," Samuel said. "Wood to cut, metal to mine, land to fence. We see relatives, everything connected, everything speaking if you know how to listen." These evening lessons became Eleanor's favorite part of each day. Sometimes they walked, Samuel showing her how to move silently through the forest, how to read the stories written in tracks and broken twigs. Sometimes they sat in companionable silence, watching the world settle into night. It was during one of these quiet moments that everything changed. They'd climb to a high meadow to gather certain plants that only grew at elevation. The sun was setting, painting the clouds in shades of rose and gold. Eleanor had been reaching for a flowering herb when her foot slipped on loose stone. Samuel caught her before she fell, his arm strong around her waist, pulling her back to solid ground. But instead of releasing her immediately, he held on for a heartbeat longer, and Eleanor found herself turning in his embrace to face him. They were close, closer than propriety had ever allowed her to be with any man. She could see flecks of gold in his dark eyes, could feel his breath warm on her face. Time seemed to pause, the world holding its breath. "Eleanor," he said, her name a question and prayer combined. She answered by not pulling away, by letting her hand rest against his chest where his heart beat strong and fast, by tilting her face up to his. The kiss was gentle, tentative, like everything between them, a careful negotiation between worlds. His lips were soft against hers, and Eleanor felt something inside her that had been wound tight for years finally release. When they parted, Samuel touched her face with wondering fingers. "I should not have." "Yes," Eleanor interrupted. "You should have." They made their way back to camp in silence, but it was a different silence than before, charged, full of possibility. Maria took one look at them and snorted. "Finally," she muttered in English, then louder in Apache, something that made several women laugh and nod knowingly. But not everyone was pleased. Eleanor noticed the looks, some curious, some hostile. She heard the whispers, caught enough Apache now to understand words like outsider and white woman. The tension came to a head 3 days later. Eleanor was returning from the spring when she heard voices raised in anger, rounding a boulder. She found Samuel facing 3 younger warriors. The conversation was in rapid Apache, but the gestures toward her made the subject clear. One of the men, tall and marked with scars from old battles, spit at Samuel's feet, even without understanding the words. Eleanor recognized the challenge in it. Samuel's response was quiet, controlled, but Eleanor saw the danger in his stillness. This was not the gentle teacher who showed her stars. This was a warrior, trained and deadly. The scarred man said something that made Samuel's face darken. He took a step forward, and Eleanor knew with sudden certainty that violence was a heartbeat away. "No," she said, stepping into view. All four men turned to her, surprise replacing anger for a moment. The scarred warrior said something harsh, gesturing for her to leave. Instead, Eleanor moved to stand beside Samuel, not behind him, like a woman needing protection, but beside him, like a partner. "I may not speak your language well," she said in careful Apache, words Samuel had taught her. "But I know courage when I see it, and I see no courage in three men challenging one." The scarred man's face flushed. He started to speak, but an older voice cut him off. Joseph Crow Feather emerged from the shadows, every inch the chief despite his weathered appearance. He spoke at length, his voice carrying the authority of years and wisdom. The three warriors listened, heads gradually lowering, though the scarred one shot one last venomous look at Eleanor before walking away. When they were gone, Joseph turned to study Eleanor with eyes too much like his son's. He said something to Samuel, who translated reluctantly. "He says you have spine for a white woman." "Just for a white woman." Joseph's weathered face cracked into what might have been a smile. He spoke again. "He says perhaps for anyone." Samuel translated. "But you should know, choosing to stand beside me means choosing all that comes with it. Not all will accept you, not all will be kind." "Were all kind to you when you returned from the white school?" Eleanor asked. Joseph's expression shifted, becoming thoughtful. He studied her for a long moment, then spoke directly to her in slow, careful English. "My son walks between worlds. It makes him strong, also makes him lonely." He paused. "Maybe two walking together find better path than one walking alone." With that cryptic statement, he left them. "Your father is subtle," Eleanor said dryly. "Like a thunderstorm." Samuel agreed. "But he's not wrong. Standing beside me today, that was dangerous." "Everything here is dangerous," Eleanor pointed out. "Bears, storms, angry warriors. Compared to those, standing beside you seems relatively safe." "Relative," he repeated, almost smiling. "You're learning to think like us." That night, the camp was subdued. Eleanor helped with evening meal preparation, aware of the undercurrents, the careful space some gave her, the deliberate warmth others showed. It was, she realized, a community deciding what to do with change. After the meal, an old woman Eleanor had seen but never spoken to approached. Her face was mapped with years, her hands gnarled but steady. She spoke at length to Eleanor in Apache, too fast to follow, then pressed something into her hands before shuffling away. Eleanor looked down at a pair of moccasins, beautifully beaded with patterns of mountains and stars. "Those are wedding moccasins," Little Dove whispered, appearing at her elbow. "Grandmother makes things, says she's tired of waiting for my brother to stop thinking and start doing." Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "But we're not yet," Little Dove agreed cheerfully. "But grandmother sees far. She's usually right." Later, when the camp had settled for the night, Eleanor found herself again on the ledge with Samuel. The stars were brilliant at this elevation. The Milky Way, a river of light across the darkness. "Today was just the beginning," Samuel said quietly. "There will be more challenges, more who say you don't belong." "Do you think I belong?" He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "I think belonging isn't about blood or birthplace. It's about choosing where your heart lives." He turned to her. "Where does your heart live?" "Eleanor." She thought of Tucson, of tea parties and corsets and proper society. That life felt like a story someone else had lived, in a language she no longer spoke fluently. Here, she said simply. Now, with the people who taught me to breathe, with the man who caught me when I fell. Samuel made a sound that might have been her name or might have been wind in the pines. Then he was kissing her again, less careful this time, less tentative. Eleanor met him eagerly, her hands tangling in his long hair, pulling him closer. When they parted, both breathing hard, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. "The old woman's moccasins," he said. "Will you keep them?" Eleanor understood what he was asking. Not just about moccasins, but about futures and choices and the winding path between worlds. "Yes," she said, and felt the words settle into her bones like coming home. Above them, the stars wheeled in their ancient patterns, indifferent to the small human dramas below. But Eleanor, held safe in the arms of a man who'd chosen her as surely as she'd chosen him, thought they might be dancing. The full moon hung like a silver dollar over the pines when Samuel finally spoke the words Eleanor had been both dreading and hoping to hear. They were sitting by the spring, their evening ritual, when he turned to her with an expression more serious than she'd ever seen. "There are things you must understand," he began, his voice formal in a way that meant this was important. "About what happened when you came here, about our laws and customs." Eleanor waited, her heart beating like a trapped bird. When a warrior saves a life in battle or raids, that life becomes bound to his. It's an old law, from the time of our grandfathers' grandfathers. The saved one becomes part of the Savior's family. "As a servant?" Eleanor asked, though she knew by now it wasn't that simple. "No, as family, sister, daughter, or—" He paused, looking out over the valley. "Or wife." The choice was traditionally the warrior's to make. Eleanor felt the weight of all those weeks suddenly make sense. The looks, the whispers, Maria's knowing smiles. "So, by your law, I'm already—" "No." Samuel turned back to her, his eyes intense. "That's the old way, the way my father's generation knew. But I've walked in your world too. I know what choice means there, what freedom means to your people." "And what does it mean to yours?" He considered. "Freedom to us is different. It's the right to live as the spirits guide us, to move with the seasons, to be part of the land instead of owning it. But in matters of the heart—" He took her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. "In that, I think your way has wisdom. Love shouldn't be commanded by law." "Then what are you saying?" "I'm saying the old law brought you to me, but it doesn't keep you. You're free, Eleanor. You've always been free. To stay, to go, to be whatever you choose to be to me." Eleanor felt tears prick her eyes. "And if I choose to stay, to be more than student or friend—" Samuel's hand tightened on hers. "Then we would be married by our custom. You would be my wife before the band. With all that means, part of the people, truly. Expected to live as we live, follow where we go, bear the hardships and joys alike. And your father, the others who don't accept me, would have to accept my choice, our choice." He lifted her hand to his lips, kissing her work-roughened palm. "But I won't lie to you. It wouldn't be easy. You would always be the white woman who chose to be Apache. Some would respect you for it. Others would always see me as an outsider." "Yes." They sat in silence, the spring bubbling its ancient song beside them. Eleanor thought of all she'd learned in these months, not just skills, but a different way of being in the world. She thought of mornings grinding corn while singing work songs, of Little Dove's laughter, of Maria's gruff kindness, of evenings learning the stars' Apache names, of Samuel's patient teaching, of the way he looked at her like she was something precious and strong all at once. "In my world," she said slowly, "marriage was a business arrangement. My father would have chosen someone suitable, likely a man with mining interests or railroad connections. I would have had no say except to obey. And here, You're giving me the choice my own people never would." She turned to face him fully. "Samuel Crowfeather, I choose you. I choose this life. I choose to be your wife by any law or custom you name." His breath caught. "You're certain once done. This can't be easily undone. My people don't believe in the white man's divorce. Marriage is for life, for better or worse." "Then it's a good thing I'm choosing better." He kissed her then, deep and sure, and Eleanor felt the last walls between her old life and new crumble to dust. When they parted, Samuel's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "There are ceremonies," he said, "traditions to follow. My mother's sister will need to approve. She stands in my mother's place. Gifts to be exchanged. And you'll need to make a wedding dress, Apache style." "Maria will help," Eleanor said confidently. "She's been dropping hints about beadwork patterns for weeks." Samuel laughed, the sound rich and free. "Nothing happens in this band without the women knowing first." They returned to camp hand in hand, and Eleanor wasn't surprised to find Maria and several other women waiting, materials for dressmaking already laid out. "Finally," Maria said. "We thought we would grow old waiting." The next days passed in a whirlwind of preparation. Eleanor learned that Apache weddings weren't the simple affairs she'd imagined. There were protocols to follow, gifts to prepare, ceremonies to observe. Samuel's mother's sister, a formidable woman named Ruth, another mission school survivor, interrogated Eleanor at length about her intentions, her understanding of Apache ways, her willingness to embrace the life fully. "You know my nephew is complicated," Ruth said bluntly. "Not fully Apache, not fully white. Walking between makes him strong but also vulnerable. Can you protect his spirit as he protects your body?" Eleanor met the older woman's eyes steadily. "I can try, with all my heart." Ruth studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Good answer. Only fools promise what they can't be sure to deliver." The wedding dress came together under many hands, white doeskin, soft as butter, decorated with hundreds of tiny beads and patterns that told stories Eleanor was only beginning to understand. Tin cones that would sing when she walked, fringe that rippled like water. "Is beautiful," Little Dove sighed, helping Eleanor try it on, like snow and stars and music all together. The ceremony itself was set for the new moon, 3 days hence, but first there was another ritual to observe. "You must go to the mountain," Maria explained. "Alone. Fast and pray for 1 day and night. Ask the spirits if this path is true." Eleanor felt a flutter of fear. She'd never been truly alone in the wilderness. "What if something happens?" "Then it's good to know before wedding. No," Maria's practicality was sometimes harsh. "But you'll be safe. Samuel will watch from distance. His tradition, the bride must choose without the groom's presence, but he protects without interfering." So Eleanor found herself climbing to a sacred cave high on the mountain, carrying only water and a blanket. The cave was small but dry, marked with paintings so old they seemed part of the rock itself. She settled in as the sun began its descent, trying to quiet her racing thoughts. Night in the mountains alone was different than night in camp. Every sound magnified, the crack of settling wood, the distant howl of wolves, the whisper of wind through pine. Eleanor wrapped the blanket tight and tried to pray, though she wasn't sure which spirits to address. The Apache ones she was only learning, or the Christian God of her childhood who seemed very far away from this wild place. In the end, she simply spoke to the darkness about her fears, her hopes, her love for a man who belonged fully nowhere but had made a place for her in his heart, about the life she was choosing and the one she was leaving behind. Somewhere in the deep of night, she must have dozed because she dreamed. Her mother came to her, not as the invalid Eleanor remembered, but young and strong and free. "You always watch the birds," her mother said. "Always wanted wings. I found them," Eleanor told her, "different than I expected. The best wings always are. Her mother smiled. Be happy, my brave girl. Be free. Eleanor woke to dawn painting the cave entrance gold. Her stomach was empty, but her heart was full. She made her way down the mountain to find Samuel waiting at the tree line, his face lighting up when he saw her. Well, he asked. The spirit said yes, she told him. Or maybe it was my mother. Either way, I'm ready. He caught her up in his arms, spinning her around until she laughed and demanded to be put down. 2 more days, he said. Then you're mine before all the people. I'm already yours, Eleanor corrected. The ceremony is just to make everyone else understand. The day of the wedding dawned clear and bright. Eleanor was wakened early by the women, who painted her face with sacred designs and dressed her in the wedding clothes with reverent hands. The dress was heavier than she'd expected, the beads and tin cones adding weight, but when she moved, it sang like rain on leaves. Samuel waited by the central fire, dressed in his finest, buckskin leggings, a shirt decorated with porcupine quills, his hair freshly washed and shining. When he saw her, his face transformed with a joy so pure it took Eleanor's breath away. The ceremony was unlike any Christian wedding Eleanor had known. They sat together on a blanket while Joseph Crowfeather spoke words in Apache that Samuel quietly translated, about the joining of 2 paths into one, about the sacred nature of the bond, about children who would walk in both worlds with strength. They exchanged gifts. Eleanor gave Samuel moccasins she'd made herself, crooked stitches and all, while he presented her with a necklace of silver and turquoise that had been his mother's. They shared food from the same bowl, drank water from the same cup, their hands touching as they held it. Then came the part Eleanor hadn't expected. One by one, members of the band came forward. Some brought gifts, a blanket, a cooking pot, a knife. Others simply spoke words Eleanor couldn't understand, but felt in the acceptance or challenge in their tones. The scarred warrior who'd confronted Samuel came last, stood silent for a long moment, then placed a single eagle feather at their feet before walking away. It's his way of accepting, Samuel whispered. Eagle feathers are sacred. He honors our union even if he doesn't like it. When all had spoken or given, Joseph raised his hands for silence. It is done, he said in English, loud enough for all to hear. She who learns is now wife to walks between worlds. Let all people know and respect this bond. The feast that followed lasted well into the night. There was venison and corn cakes, wild honey and pine nut soup, dancing around the fire, men and women in separate circles that occasionally merged. Eleanor found herself pulled into the women's dance, stumbling at first, then finding the rhythm as her wedding dress sang with her movements. Later, much later, Samuel led her to a new lodge set apart from the others. Their lodge now, prepared by the women while she'd been on the mountain. Inside, furs were piled soft and deep. A small fire burned in the center, and their few possessions were arranged with care. My wife, Samuel said softly, wonderingly, as if testing the words. My husband, Eleanor replied, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. They came together in the firelight, gentle and sure, 2 people who'd found home in each other despite all the world's divisions. Outside, the band celebrated under stars that blessed Apache and Anglo alike. Inside, Eleanor and Samuel began their joined path, walking between worlds but no longer walking alone. The first weeks of marriage were a dance of discovery. Eleanor woke each dawn to find Samuel already stirring the fire, his movements quiet and sure. Those early morning moments became precious, the lodge still warm with sleep, the world outside just beginning to lighten, and the 2 of them learning the rhythms of shared life. You don't have to rise so early, Samuel told her one morning, finding her grinding corn before the sun had fully cleared the mountains. Apache wives work, Eleanor replied, echoing Maria's teachings. Or do you want people saying walks between worlds chose a lazy woman? He caught her hand, stilling the grinding stone. I want them to say he chose a woman who makes him forget which world he's walking in. These tender moments were balanced by the harsh realities of their life. News came with traders and scouts. The army was building more forts. Settlers were pushing into traditional hunting grounds, and other Apache bands were being forced onto reservations. The free life Eleanor had chosen was shrinking like a puddle in the desert sun. We may need to move south. Joseph Crow Feather announced during a council meeting. Into the Mexican mountains where the soldiers can't follow. Mexico has soldiers too, Samuel pointed out. And they hate Apache more than the Americans do. The argument that followed was long and heated. Eleanor sat with the women, understanding enough Apache now to follow the main points. Some wanted to fight. Others counseled negotiation. A few spoke of surrendering to the reservation life if it meant their children would survive. "What do you think?" Little Dove asked her quietly. Eleanor watched her husband argue passionately for finding a middle path, trading with Americans when possible, avoiding conflict, surviving in the margins between nations. "I think the world is changing faster than anyone wants to admit," she said, "and I don't know if there's room in it for the life we're living." That night, Samuel was restless. Eleanor woke to find him sitting by the dying fire, staring into the coals as if they held answers. "Can't sleep." He pulled her against him, her back to his chest, wrapping a blanket around them both. "I keep thinking about my time at Carlisle. They told us we were the future, that learning white ways would save our people. But what if they were wrong? What if all I learned was how to watch my people disappear?" Eleanor turned in his arms to face him. "You learned more than that. You learned that there's more than one way to be Apache, more than one way to survive. Survive isn't the same as live." "No," she agreed. "But sometimes surviving long enough means you get the chance to live again later." He kissed her forehead. "When did you become so wise?" "When I married a man who thinks too much." Their laughter woke a coyote somewhere in the distance, its answering call a reminder that the wild still existed, for now. As autumn deepened, Eleanor discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually. Morning sickness she initially blamed on bad water, exhaustion that went beyond the normal tiredness of their hard life. It was Maria who confirmed it, her knowing hands gentle on Eleanor's belly. "Spring, baby," she announced. "Strong one, I think, stubborn like both parents." Eleanor's emotions were a storm, joy and terror in equal measure. A baby here. In this uncertain life, a child who would be neither fully Apache nor white, born into a world that seemed to have no place for such mixing. Samuel's reaction, when she told him, was to go completely still. Then he was holding her, his face buried in her hair, murmuring words in Apache and English and something that might have been prayer. "Our child," he said wonderingly. "Our child will be the bridge I could never quite be." Or lost between worlds like us. Eleanor couldn't help but voice her fear. "No." Samuel's voice was fierce. "Our child will belong to both worlds. We'll make sure of it." The band's reaction was mixed but mostly positive. Children were always welcomed, being seen as hope for the future. Ruth performed a blessing ceremony, painting Eleanor's belly with sacred designs and singing songs for the baby's health. Even the scarred warrior, whose name Eleanor had learned was Marcus Standing Bear, brought a small charm for protection. But the pregnancy also sharpened the debates about their future. A baby changed things. It was one thing for adults to choose the hard life of freedom, another to bring a child into such uncertainty. Winter came early and harsh. Snow trapped them in the high valleys. Game grew scarce, and the stored food dwindled faster than expected. Eleanor learned what true hunger felt like, the gnawing emptiness that made even pine bark tea seem like a feast. Samuel hunted relentlessly, often gone for days, returning thin and exhausted with whatever small game he could find. The other men did the same, but it wasn't enough. The elders gave their portions to the children. Pregnant women, Eleanor included, received slightly more, but she often slipped half her meal to Little Dove when no one was looking. It was during the worst of the hunger that visitors arrived, a Mexican trader and his Apache wife, bringing news along with a few precious bags of corn and beans to trade. "The army is offering bounties," the trader said in Spanish, which Eleanor now understood well enough to follow. "For information about hostile bands, for scalps, for captives returned." His eyes flickered to Eleanor as he said the last, and Samuel's hand moved to his knife. "We trade fair here," Joseph said coldly. "Take your goods and go if you bring such talk to our fire." The trader shrugged, but his wife leaned forward. "There's more. A white woman's family searches for her. Rich family from Tucson, offering much gold for her return." Eleanor's heart stopped. Her cousins. It had to be. "No white women here," Maria said flatly. "Only Apache wives." The trader's wife studied Eleanor with knowing eyes, but said nothing more. They completed their trade and left the next morning, but the damage was done. The band looked at Eleanor differently now, not as a burden, but as a potential resource. How much food would that gold buy? How many rifles? How much safety? "No one will force you," Samuel said that night, holding her as she shook with more than cold. "I'll die first." "I know," Eleanor said. "But what if it's the right thing for the baby, for everyone? Is that what you want?" "I want our child to be born into a world with a future," she admitted. "I don't know if that world exists here anymore." Spring came slowly, Eleanor's belly rounding with the passing weeks. She learned to walk differently, balancing the new weight. The band had survived the winter, but barely. More discussions of reservations, of Mexico, of scattering to the winds and trying to blend into Mexican villages or American towns. It was during a spring hunt that everything changed. Eleanor was gathering early greens with the women when they heard shots. Not hunting shots. Too many, too fast. Battle. "Run," Maria commanded, and they scattered. Eleanor tried to keep up, but pregnancy made her clumsy. She stumbled, fell, struggled to rise. Strong hands pulled her up. Ruth, her face grim. "This way, quick." They made it to a cluster of rocks just as uniformed soldiers appeared on the ridge. Eleanor's heart hammered as she recognized the blue coats of the cavalry. Behind them came Apache scouts, turncoats. Her band called them. Apache who helped the army track their own people. The fighting was brief but vicious. Through gaps in the rocks, Eleanor saw Samuel and the other warriors trying to buy time for the women and children to escape. She saw Marcus standing bare fall, his challenge finally met. She saw Joseph Crowfeather, proud and fierce, go down under 3 soldiers. Then Samuel was there, bloody but whole, pulling her deeper into the rocks. "We have to go, now!" They ran, or tried to. Eleanor's condition made speed impossible. They could hear pursuit, voices calling in English and Spanish, orders to surrender, promises of food and safety on the reservation. "Go," Eleanor gasped. "Take the others and go. I'm slowing you down." "Never." Samuel's arm around her waist was all that kept her moving. "We go together or not at all." They almost made it. The canyon mouth was just ahead, promising escape into a maze of paths only the Apache knew. Then Eleanor's body betrayed her. Pain lanced through her middle, dropping her to her knees. "The baby," she gasped. "Something's wrong." Samuel's face went ashen. They could hear soldiers closing in. In moments, they'd be surrounded. "Listen to me." Eleanor gripped his hands, speaking fast. "Tell them I'm your captive, that you are bringing me back for ransom. They'll believe it. They want to believe it." "No." "Yes." The pain was coming in waves now. "Our child needs a chance. This is it. Please, Samuel, for our baby." She saw the moment he broke. The proud warrior who'd given her choice after choice finally faced with none. He kissed her hard, desperately. "I'll find you," he promised. "Whatever happens, wherever they take you, I'll find you both." Then the soldiers were there, rifles raised, shouting orders. Samuel stepped away from Eleanor, his hands visible, playing the role she'd asked of him. She collapsed to the ground, no longer needing to pretend weakness as her body seized with premature labor. The last thing she saw before the world grayed out was Samuel being forced to his knees, hands bound behind his back, his dark eyes never leaving her face. Then there were soldiers' hands on her, voices exclaiming over finding a white woman, someone shouting for a medical officer. The baby came too soon, too fast, born in an army ambulance wagon with a doctor who looked too young for his uniform. A girl, tiny but fierce, her first cry thin but determined. "She's small," the doctor said, "but strong, fighter like her mother." Eleanor held her daughter with tears streaming down her face. Dark hair like her father, but skin lighter than pure Apache, a child of two worlds, just as Samuel had said. "What's her name?" a nurse asked, preparing to write it in the record. Eleanor looked at her perfect, impossible daughter, thought of Samuel's promise to find them, of the life they'd tried to build between worlds, of the bridge this child would have to be. "Hope," she said finally. "Her name is Hope." Outside the wagon, she could hear soldiers talking, discussing what to do with the captives, whether the warriors would hang or be sent to prison. She closed her eyes and held her daughter close, praying to Apache spirits and the Christian God alike that Samuel's promise would prove stronger than the forces tearing their world apart. The Fort Buchanan hospital smelled of carbolic acid and laudanum. Eleanor sat by the narrow window, Hope sleeping in her arms, watching dust devils dance across the parade ground. 3 weeks since the capture, 3 weeks of questions, examinations, and carefully constructed lies. "Miss Morrison," the colonel had said during her latest interrogation, "your story doesn't quite add up. You claim you were held captive for nearly a year, yet you speak some Apache. You were found in native dress, clearly with child by one of them, yet you defend their actions. Stockholm Syndrome." The young doctor had interjected, "It's not uncommon for captives to develop sympathies for their captors, the mind's way of surviving trauma." Eleanor had let them believe it, easier than explaining she'd chosen every moment, that her captor was her husband, that she'd rather be in that mountain camp than this supposed civilization. Now, a different kind of choice lay before her. Her cousins had been notified. The Prescotts were coming from Tucson with lawyers and plans. The colonel had made it clear. She could testify against the captured Apache, help the army understand their movements and camps, or she could face questions about her own willingness to remain with them. "Your father was a respected man," he'd said. It would be a shame for his memory to be tarnished by suggestions that his daughter had willingly consorted with savages. The door opened. Eleanor didn't turn, recognizing the heavy tread of Sergeant Muller, the German immigrant who'd been oddly kind to her. "Visitors, miss," he said, "in the colonel's office." Eleanor's heart leaped. Had Samuel somehow... But no. The Prescotts stood in the office like ravens in their black traveling clothes. Cousin Margaret's face pinched with disapproval. Cousin Henry already calculating costs. "Eleanor," Margaret said, her voice dripping false sympathy. "You poor, poor dear, what you must have endured." "We've arranged everything," Henry added briskly. "A quiet place back east where you can recover. The child can be placed with a good family." "No." Eleanor's voice came out harder than she'd intended. "Hope stays with me." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "Surely you understand that raising a half-breed child would be difficult." "For everyone. Her name is Hope. She's my daughter. We stay together." The cousins exchanged glances. Henry cleared his throat. "The colonel mentioned you've been reluctant to assist with intelligence about the hostiles. Perhaps if you were more cooperative?" "I'll tell them what they want to know," Eleanor said quietly. She felt like a traitor. But what choice did she have? Samuel was imprisoned, possibly dead. The band was scattered. She had to think of Hope now. The interrogations that followed were exhausting. Maps spread on tables, questions about water sources, winter camps, number of warriors. Eleanor gave them enough truth to be believable, mixed with enough misdirection to hopefully protect any who might have escaped. She placed camps where she knew they'd moved from, described routines they'd likely changed. "The one who fathered your child," the intelligence officer pressed. "He spoke English well. You said, what was his name?" Eleanor hesitated. To name Samuel might help them find him, but it might also identify him as educated, valuable for interrogation rather than execution. "Samuel Crow Feather," she said finally. "He attended Carlisle." Interest sparked in the officer's eyes. A Carlisle Indian. He could be useful, very useful indeed. That night, Sergeant Muller brought news with her dinner tray. "The Apache warriors from your band," he said quietly. "They're being sent to Florida. Prison, not hanging." Eleanor's relief was so strong she swayed. "All of them." "The ones who survived." His expression was carefully neutral. "Your testimony helped. The colonel decided they were worth more alive, especially the English speaker. Florida, the other side of the continent, but alive." The Prescotts pushed for a quick departure, eager to spirit Eleanor away from the scandal. But military bureaucracy moved slowly, and there were forms, testimonies, travel arrangements to make. During this limbo, Eleanor found an unexpected ally. Sarah Chen was the Chinese laundress's daughter, educated at mission school, who helped in the hospital. She brought Eleanor extra food, held hope when Eleanor needed to bathe, and most importantly, carried messages. "There's a Mexican trader," Sarah whispered one evening. "Says he has word from the mountains, for the white woman who speaks Apache." Eleanor's hands shook as she read the message, written in Spanish on scraped hide. "The crow still flies. The sun will rise again. Wait." "Maria, it had to be. Some of the band had escaped." "Can you get word back?" Eleanor asked. Sarah nodded. "What should I say?" Eleanor thought carefully. Too much information was dangerous. "Tell them, the small bird learns to fly. The nest moves east, but the heart stays." Days blended together. Hope grew stronger, her grip fierce when she wrapped tiny fingers around Eleanor's thumb. The Prescotts made arrangements. A house in Philadelphia, a discreet doctor, a story about Eleanor being widowed young. They spoke around her as if she were furniture, planning her life with the same casual authority men had always assumed. But Eleanor was no longer the woman who'd left Tucson in her father's wagon. She'd learned patience from Apache women, strategy from watching council meetings, survival from the land itself. She nodded and agreed and made her own plans. The night before they were to leave for the east, Muller came to her room. "The Apache prisoners shipped out this morning," he said. "Thought you should know." "Thank you." Eleanor managed through the tightness in her throat. "There's more." He glanced around, then pulled a small bundle from his coat. "One of them, the English speaker, asked me to give you this. Said to tell you the sun always rises." With trembling hands, Eleanor unwrapped the bundle. Inside was Samuel's silver and turquoise necklace, his mother's necklace, the one he'd given her at their wedding, and wrapped within it, a single eagle feather. She pressed the items to her chest, tears flowing freely. He was alive. More than that, he'd managed this final message, this promise. The sun would rise again. They would find each other. "Miss," Muller's voice was gentle, "best hide those questions otherwise." Eleanor nodded, tucking the precious items into Hope's blankets. Her daughter would carry her father's promise with her, even if she couldn't yet understand it. The journey east was a blur of trains and hotels, Margaret's constant corrections of Eleanor's corrupted behavior, Henry's penny-pinching complaints about expenses. Eleanor played the traumatized captive when needed, the grateful rescued woman when useful. All the while, she watched and learned and planned. Philadelphia was a shock. So many people. Buildings crowding out sky. Air thick with coal smoke. The house Henry had arranged was narrow and dark, squeezed between identical homes on a street that never knew silence. "You'll adjust," Margaret said briskly. "Civilization takes time to reappreciate after your ordeal. We've arranged for a doctor who specializes in nervous conditions, and a wet nurse for the child." "I nurse my own daughter," Eleanor said firmly. "Don't be ridiculous. No proper lady." "I'm not a proper lady anymore." Eleanor met her cousin's gaze steadily. "Haven't you heard I'm the woman who lived with savages, who bore a half-breed child, who survived things proper ladies don't even imagine? So yes, I'll nurse my own daughter. I'll raise her to be strong and free and everything this world tries to crush out of women." Margaret's face went red, then white. "You're overwrought. The doctor said to expect this wild talk. It will pass once you're properly treated." But Eleanor saw fear in her cousin's eyes. Fear of what Eleanor had become, what she represented. A woman who'd lived outside society's cage and found she could fly. That night, as rain beat against windows that didn't open wide enough to breathe through, Eleanor held Hope close and whispered stories in Apache and English both. Stories of mountains and stars, of a warrior father who walked between worlds, of a mother who chose love over safety. "We're not done, little one," she promised. "This is just another kind of survival, and survivor is something we know how to be." In the distance, a train whistle sounded like a coyote's call. Eleanor closed her eyes and imagined she could smell sage and pine, feel mountain wind, hear Samuel's voice on the breeze. The sun will rise again. She would wait. She would survive. She would teach her daughter both worlds while never forgetting which one held their hearts. And when the time was right, when the world shifted as it always did, she would be ready. The Prescotts thought they'd caged a broken bird. They had no idea they'd brought home an eagle who was simply biding her time, teaching her young one to fly in whatever sky she found herself under. Somewhere in Florida, in a prison built to break spirits. Samuel Crowfeather watched the same stars she'd learned to name in Apache, somewhere in the mountains. Maria and the survivors sang the old songs and remembered. And in a narrow Philadelphia townhouse, Eleanor Morrison Crowfeather sang her daughter to sleep with lullabies in 2 languages, planning for the day when cages would open and eagles would soar again. 5 years passed like seasons in the desert, slow and harsh, then suddenly blooming with unexpected life. Hope grew strong and quick, with her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. In Philadelphia's crowded streets, she was the Morrison girl, the unfortunate child whose mother had endured such trials. But in the privacy of their small rooms, she was Hope Crowfeather, daughter of mountains and stars. Eleanor had become a ghost story herself. The women at church whispered about her. The captive who'd returned changed, who refused proper treatment for her condition, who taught her half-breed daughter to read not just from the Bible, but from strange books about plants and animals and the movements of celestial bodies. "She speaks to the child in heathen tongues," Margaret reported to anyone who'd listen. "And the girl draws the most peculiar pictures, all eagles and mountains and savage symbols." But Eleanor had found her own form of resistance. She took in sewing, earning enough to rent rooms away from the Prescotts. She volunteered at the city's Indian school, teaching reading to children torn from their families as Samuel had been, and she waited. The letter came on a spring day when Hope was teaching pigeons to eat from her hand in their tiny courtyard. No return address, but Eleanor knew Sarah Chen's careful script. "Florida prison closing. Survivors being sent to Indian Territory. The crow remembers where the sun rises." Eleanor's hands trembled. Samuel was coming back west. Not free, not yet, but closer. Indian Territory was still 1,000 miles away, but it wasn't the other side of the continent. That night, she made her decision. "We're going on an adventure," she told Hope, who clapped her hands with delight. At 5, She was already tired of walls and rules and the way people stared. Leaving Philadelphia was easier than Eleanor had expected. The Prescotts were almost relieved to see her go, especially after she hinted at heading further west for her health. They gave her a small sum, guilt money, hush money, go-away money. Eleanor took it without shame. She'd need every penny. The journey west was different as a woman alone with a child. Train conductors frowned. Hotel clerks asked questions. But Eleanor had learned to wear respectability like armor when needed, to play the widow, seeking a new start in healthier climates. They stopped in Kansas City, where Eleanor used part of her money to buy supplies, sturdy clothes, camping gear, a rifle she remembered how to use. Hope watched everything with bright, curious eyes, absorbing this new world like water after drought. From Kansas City, they joined a wagon train heading to Santa Fe. Eleanor told the wagon master she was a widow heading to join family in New Mexico. He looked skeptical but took her money. On the trail, their true selves emerged. Eleanor's body remembered how to walk for hours, how to conserve water, how to read the sky. Hope bloomed like a desert flower, making friends with the Mexican drivers who laughed at her mix of English, Spanish, and Apache words. It was near the Cimarron cutoff that fate intervened. The wagon train had stopped for water when riders appeared on the horizon. Eleanor's heart jumped. Apache. But no, these were mixed group. Apache scouts serving the army, leading a patrol. Among them, impossibly, was Samuel. Thinner, marked by years of imprisonment, but unmistakably him. Their eyes met across the distance, and Eleanor saw him go rigid in his saddle. But he was in uniform now, a scout for the very army that had imprisoned him. He couldn't simply ride to her. That night, a pebble hit her wagon canvas. Eleanor slipped out to find Samuel waiting in the shadows, his face a battlefield of joy and pain. Eleanor, her name was a prayer on his lips. They came together like water finding its course, all the years dissolving in that embrace. When they parted, tears tracked both their faces. How? Tuberculosis in the prison, he said quietly. Half of us died. The government decided the survivors would be more useful as scouts than corpses. Conditional freedom, they call it. I serve 5 years. Help track hostiles. And they'll give me papers saying I'm civilized enough to live among whites. And you agreed. His smile was bitter. What choice, die in Florida or live long enough to find you to find? His voice broke. Is she? Eleanor whistled softly. The signal she'd taught Hope. Their daughter slipped from the wagon like a small shadow, then stopped, staring at the stranger who looked at her like she was the sun itself. Hope, Eleanor said softly. This is your father. The child studied Samuel with those serious dark eyes, then spoke in clear Apache. Mother told me you would come when the sun was right. Samuel dropped to his knees, tears flowing freely as Hope walked into his arms. They stayed like that, father and daughter finding each other under stars that had watched over both their journeys. I can't stay, Samuel said finally. The patrol leaves at dawn, but Eleanor, I know where Maria is. Some of our band made it to the mountains below Santa Fe. They live quietly, trading with locals, avoiding notice. That's where we're going, Eleanor said firmly. Hope needs to know both her peoples. It's dangerous. If the army finds out you're not really heading to family, then we'll be careful. She touched his face, relearning its planes. Samuel, I've spent 5 years being careful, being proper, being less than whole. We're going home. He kissed her then, deep and desperate. 5 years of longing in that moment. When they parted, he pulled something from his shirt, a leather pouch on a cord. For Hope, he said. Her umbilical cord. Maria saved it, kept it safe all these years, so she would always find her way home. Eleanor tied it around their daughter's neck with trembling hands. Such a small thing, but it meant everything. Continuity, belonging, the unbroken cord between past and future. 2 more years. Samuel promised. 2 more years and I'll be free. I'll find you in the mountains. We'll be waiting, Eleanor promised. They parted before dawn. Samuel riding away with the patrol, Hope waving until he disappeared into the distance. Eleanor told the wagon master she'd received word her family had moved, that she'd be leaving the train at the next settlement. From there, they traveled by stage and finally on foot, following landmarks Samuel had described. The mountains rose before them like old friends, and Hope ran ahead, laughing, finally in a landscape that matched her spirit. They found the hidden valley on a day when summer rain had painted everything green, a small camp, carefully concealed, where smoke rose from cooking fires and children played in the stream. Maria emerged from a shelter, older but unbowed, and her cry of joy brought everyone running. She who learns you came home. The reunion was tears and laughter, stories shared and sorrows mourned. Of the original band, only 20 had escaped the soldiers. They'd built a new life here, trading herbs and crafts with Mexican villages, invisible to American authorities who rarely ventured into these remote places. Eleanor and Hope were welcomed like returning family. Hope especially was celebrated, a child of both worlds who spoke 3 languages and moved between them like water. She learned the old songs from the grandmothers, the plant knowledge from Maria, the survival skills her mother had only begun to teach her. And Eleanor. She found herself again. Not the frightened girl who'd awakened in an Apache lodge, not the broken woman Philadelphia had tried to create, but something new, someone who could navigate any world because she'd chosen her own path. 2 years later, when Samuel finally rode into their valley, his army service complete and his freedom papers in hand, he found his wife and daughter waiting. Hope ran to him, tall for 7 and wild as the mountains that raised her. Eleanor followed more slowly, savoring the moment she'd held in her heart through all the difficult years. "You're here," she said simply. "Where else would I be?" He dismounted, pulled them both close. "My sun and star, my home." They built a life there in the hidden valley, part of the band but also a part. Samuel used his education to help with legal matters when needed, protecting their invisible community with paperwork and carefully worded letters. Eleanor taught the children, Apache traditions and American letters both, preparing them for a world that would demand they walk between cultures. Hope grew into her name, a bridge between worlds as her parents had dreamed. She could track deer through pine forests and read Shakespeare with equal skill. She knew the constellations by their Apache names and their Greek ones. She was what the future needed, someone who belonged everywhere and nowhere, choosing her path with every step. Years passed. The world changed. Railroads crossed the desert. Statehood came to the territories. The frontier that had seemed eternal vanished like snow in spring. But in certain remote valleys, in places maps didn't quite capture, the old ways persisted, adapted, evolved, but never quite disappeared. Eleanor became a legend herself, the white woman who chose to be Apache, who raised a daughter between worlds, who proved that love could bridge any divide if people were brave enough to leap. Travelers sometimes reported seeing her, an older woman with sun-weathered skin and gray-streaked hair, gathering herbs with Apache women, speaking in languages that shifted like wind. They called her different names in different places: the lost woman, the captive who stayed, the bridge walker. But in the valley where eagles soared and springs ran clear, she was simply Eleanor Crowfeather, a woman who had chosen her own path and walked it without regret. And sometimes, on nights when the stars were particularly bright, she would tell her grandchildren, Hope's children, who carried even more worlds in their blood, about the choice that started it all, about waking in a strange place and finding home, about the man who gave her freedom by teaching her she'd always been free. "Love isn't capture," she would say. Samuel's hand warm in hers as their family gathered around the fire. "Love is choosing, again and again, to walk the same path together, even when that path leads through difficult terrain. even when the whole world says you're walking the wrong way. The children would nod solemnly, understanding in their bones what their grandmother meant. They were living proof of it, the future born from two people brave enough to choose each other across all the world's divisions. In the end, Eleanor Morrison Crowfeather was remembered not as the woman who was taken, but as the woman who chose. And in that choosing, she wrote a different story than the one the world expected. A story of love that recognized no boundaries, of families that created themselves, of freedom found in the most unexpected places. The woman who'd once envied caged birds their wings had learned the greatest truth. Sometimes the door to the cage was always open. You just had to be brave enough to fly. Thank you for listening to this Wild West love story. I'm curious, where in the world are you enjoying this tale? Please comment below and let me know. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more authentic frontier stories. And share your thoughts about Eleanor and Samuel's journey. Did their love story touch your heart? What would you have chosen in Eleanor's place? Let's discuss in the comments.